The cabin of Flight 482 hummed with the low drone of engines and hushed conversations when 9-year-old Aaliyah Wright settled into her first-class seat. Her small frame seemed almost swallowed by the plush cream leather chair, but she sat up straight, clutching her worn math workbook to her chest. Sunlight streamed through the oversized window beside her, illuminating the crisp folds of her scholarship sweatshirt, a thrift store find in Stanford crimson, and the tiny knot of nerves in her stomach. This was supposed to be the proudest moment of her young life, a first flight to Atlanta for the National Math Challenge. Instead, it would become the moment she'd never forget. A few rows ahead, a tall flight attendant in a navy blazer paused mid-stride. Her name badge read Veronica Harlow, and there was something sharp in the tilt of her chin. Veronica's eyes flicked past the other passengers. Business travelers leafing through newspapers, couples quietly sipping mimosas, before landing on Aaliyah. The flight attendant's lips curled into a thin smile, almost predatory, and she took a deliberate step toward 2C. Aaliyah glanced up from the seatback screen, confusion rippling through her. Had she done something wrong? The silver armrest felt cold beneath her fingertips. Then Veronica's voice cut through the ambient noise like a whip cracking. "Hey kid, this isn't your section. You don't belong here." Every head in first class swiveled in unison. Aaliyah's heart lurched so violently she thought she might cough it up. The cabin lights seemed to dim. Even the hum of the engines faded. Veronica leaned over, one hand planted firmly on the armrest, and repeated louder this time, "I said you don't belong here. Move along." The finality of that phrase, "You don't belong here," hung in the air. For a moment, nobody moved. The other flight attendants froze in the aisle, trays half lifted. A corporate gentleman in a pinstriped suit paused mid-bite, eyes wide. A couple whispering in seat 1A snapped their heads around. Masks slipped, revealing curiosity laced with discomfort. Aaliyah felt every gaze burn into her small body, as if she were a mistake that needed immediate correction. Her cheeks flamed. She wanted to shrink, to vanish down into the seat cushions. Her math workbook slipped from her grasp and thudded softly onto the spotless carpet. Aaliyah bit her lip so hard she tasted copper. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, not for the ruined moment, but for the humiliation that churned in her chest. She'd worked so hard to earn this ticket. She'd dreamed of that contest stage, envisioned herself solving equations under spotlights. But now all she wanted was for the world to stop staring. Veronica's smirk widened as she surveyed the reaction she'd provoked. She straightened, turned on a heel, and swept past Aaliyah, deliberately ignoring her boarding pass, the Stanford sweatshirt, the hopeful smile Aaliyah mustered. The attendant's departure left a vacuum of tension behind her, like a gust of cold wind in a warm room. Aaliyah's fingers trembled as she reached to pick up her workbook, but her hands were shaking too badly to grip it properly. She watched the glossy pages wave in the breeze from the overhead vent, her carefully penciled formulas smudging at the edges. In that tense silence, Aaliyah's mind flickered to her grandmother's gentle voice. "You belong anywhere you choose to sit, baby girl. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." The memory grounded her trembling body like an anchor. She drew in a shaky breath, pressed her palm against her chest, and whispered to herself, "I do belong." The words felt foreign on her tongue, but they were true. Behind her, another flight attendant, Miguel Ramirez, caught her eye. His warm brown gaze held a flicker of apology, and he gave her a subtle nod before turning away. Aaliyah realized he must have heard Veronica's harsh words, seen her flinch. In that second, she understood two things. One, she was utterly alone in the silent storm of first-class scrutiny. And two, there was at least one person who quietly cared. Aaliyah straightened her shoulders and leaned back, though her heart still pounded against her ribs. Her younger sister might have burst into tears. Her friend might have stormed off in anger. But Aaliyah had learned to carry her pride like a shield. She bent over her workbook, pressing the pages flat and tracing the lines of algebraic expressions. She let her fingers find the familiar symbols, plus signs, variables, neat rows of numbers, as if each equation could restore her breath. But the humiliation wouldn't stay buried. With each passing second, the sting in her cheeks grew, hot enough to blur her vision. Other passengers whispered, exchanged sympathetic glances, and even shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Aaliyah sensed the collective pity of a generation conditioned to believe that a child like her should have been protected by the adults around her, not singled out in the name of first-class decorum. She closed her eyes for a beat and felt the cabin sway beneath her, reminding her she was thousands of feet in the air. No escape route, no hiding place. Then, a small, determined smile crawled over her lips. She might be 9, she might be alone, but she wasn't powerless. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the din of soft chatter resumed, passengers adjusting and flight attendants reclaiming their rhythm. Yet Aaliyah sat motionless, gathering herself. She would not let this moment define her. With trembling fingers, she pulled a slim recorder from her pocket, her heart ticking in time with each second. The world might have decided she didn't belong here, but she was about to show them just how powerful a quiet, determined voice could be. And that silent promise, echoing in the quiet of the cabin, was the true beginning of Aaliyah Wright's fight for justice. Aaliyah Wright's world was a patchwork of numbers and neighborhood sights long before she ever set foot on an airplane. On the South Chicago block where she lived, rusted fire escapes zigzagged across brick buildings, and the hum of distant traffic was as familiar as the ticking of her favorite clock at home. Yet every evening, after homework and dinner, she would curl up with her battered math workbook, its edges frayed, its pages dog-eared from constant reference, and lose herself in equations that felt more like stories than numbers. To Aaliyah, variables and functions were characters in a grand narrative of logic and beauty, and she was determined to master each one. Her mother, Kiana, watched these moments with pride and a touch of concern. Between her full-time job as a hospital administrator and weekend shifts at a law firm's front desk, Kiana had little free time, but she never missed Aaliyah's nightly study session. She'd pause in the doorway of Aaliyah's bedroom, brush a loose curl from her daughter's forehead, and murmur, "That's my brilliant girl." Then she'd slip away quietly, leaving Aaliyah to chase the thrill of solving yet another tricky problem. In those moments, Aaliyah felt seen, not as a kid from a tough neighborhood, but as someone whose mind could unlock doors her family had never dreamed possible. Across town, in a modest apartment filled with framed family photos and vintage lace curtains, Eloise Wright, Aaliyah's grandmother, kept a more direct watch. A retired school teacher, Eloise had a gentle way of coaxing confidence out of her granddaughter. Each morning she would press a warm breakfast into Aaliyah's hands and tuck a handwritten note into her backpack. The note might read, "You're destined for greatness," or "Remember, smart girls change the world." Eloise believed in affirmations the way some people believed in prayer, and Aaliyah soaked up those messages like a sponge. It wasn't just the words, it was the conviction behind them. All that dedication finally paid off the month before when Aaliyah received the letter that changed everything. It arrived in a crisp white envelope bearing the seal of the Preston Foundation's National Math Challenge. When Aaliyah peeled it open, her heart pounded so hard she thought she might pass out. Inside was an official scholarship invitation, congratulating her on being one of 100 national finalists invited to compete in Atlanta, an all-expenses-paid trip to test her skills against the brightest young minds in the country. Kiana and Eloise encouraged her to read the letter aloud, but Aaliyah could barely speak. Her voice trembled as she tried to articulate her disbelief. When she finally managed, her words were muffled. "They picked me." That night, the three of them huddled in the living room, tears and laughter mingling as they celebrated a dream none of them fully believed could come true. In the days leading up to the flight, the apartment buzzed with excitement and the low hum of last-minute preparations. Aaliyah's clothes were neatly folded on her bed. The maroon Preston Foundation sweatshirt she had bought secondhand, a pair of jeans, and the white sneakers she'd worn every day until they were scuffed beyond recognition. Eloise ironed each item by hand, humming softly as she smoothed out every wrinkle. Kiana, meanwhile, fussed over the travel documents. Boarding pass, scholarship certificate, permission slips, tucked them in a slim folder, and set it on the kitchen counter next to her car keys. "Everything's here?" she reassured Aaliyah with a smile that didn't quite hide her own nerves. On the morning of departure, Aaliyah woke before dawn. She pressed her face to the window and watched the streetlights fade as the sky turned from ink to periwinkle. The aroma of waffles and bacon drifted down the hallway. Eloise's voice called, "Breakfast, baby girl?" Aaliyah slid out of bed, her shoelaces flapping as she ran to the table. Kiana poured orange juice and pressed a warm waffle into Aaliyah's hands. They ate in comfortable silence, the only sound the soft clink of cutlery on plates and the distant roar of traffic waking up outside. Before they left, Eloise gathered Aaliyah in her arms, pressing a quick kiss to her forehead. "Remember who you are," she said firmly. "Your mind belongs anywhere it wants to go. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Kiana added her own blessing, wrapping Aaliyah tight. "Be proud. Be you." Even in the parking lot, as cars zipped around them and the city awakened, Aaliyah felt an anchor in their words, a reminder that no matter what happened, she carried her family's belief with her. As they pulled into the expansive lot of O'Hare International Airport, Aaliyah's nerves twined with excitement. The terminal's soaring ceilings and bright windows felt like stepping into another world. Overhead signs flashed gate numbers and flight statuses, and travelers of every stripe, businessmen in suits, families with toddlers, solo adventurers with backpacks, moved like currents in a river. Aaliyah clutched her folder to her chest, feeling its weight as both a promise and a responsibility. At the security checkpoint, she moved through the line with practiced calm, mimicking Kiana's measured confidence. Eloise stood by her side, offering reassuring smiles to ease the tension. When it was her turn, the TSA officer waved her through without hesitation, and Aaliyah held her breath, expecting a hiccup, but the routine pat-down was quick and professional. No one asked for extra screening. No one glared at her scholarship documents. For a moment, she was just another traveler, free to embark on her journey. Finally, they arrived at Gate B-22, where a sleek aircraft bearing the Trans-American logo waited. The plane's engines were silent, but Aaliyah could already feel their power thrumming beneath the polished fuselage. She adjusted the strap of her backpack and looked up at the jet bridge, heart fluttering like a hummingbird. Beside her, Kiana and Eloise exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Pride, hope, just a touch of worry. Then they smiled, and Aaliyah knew she wasn't alone. With one last hug and a whispered, "I'll see you soon," Aaliyah stepped onto the jet bridge and took her first steps toward the cabin, toward the contest, toward the promise of what might be. In that moment, the world seemed both vast and intimate, full of possibilities she'd only begun to imagine. And as she reached the threshold of the airplane door, her pulse quickened, her chest swelled with determination. And Aaliyah Wright, 9 years old and brimming with quiet confidence, prepared to take flight on the next great chapter of her story. Aaliyah sank into her seat again, clutching her scholarship folder as the plane began its steady climb. She'd barely processed everything that had happened in those first 2 chapters of her day. The proud tears in her grandmother's eyes, the hush of the cabin when her scholarship was announced at O'Hare, even the whispered taunt from Veronica Harlow that still echoed in her mind. Now, high above Lake Michigan, she had a moment to breathe and piece together the reality of how she'd arrived here. Back in South Chicago, life had always been a delicate balancing act for the Wright family. Their 2-bedroom apartment sat on a tree-lined block where every neighbor had a story of struggle, resilience, or both. Kiana Wright, Aaliyah's mother, carried her own. She graduated top of her class in nursing administration, but opportunities were scarce and paychecks never stretched as far as they should. By day, she oversaw hospital paperwork and patient schedules. By night, she sat at a desk in a law firm's reception area, answering phones and filing case briefs for attorneys who paid her just enough to keep the lights on. It was that determination, single-mother grit, that allowed Aaliyah to chase her own dreams. Long before today's flight, Aaliyah had poured hours into that battered math workbook, the one whose cover had been repaired more times than she could count with strips of clear tape. Inside, each problem sat beside notes in different colored pens, blue for formulas, red for reminders of tricky steps, green for ideas to revisit later. Aaliyah treated the workbook like a living document, a journal of her progress and her hopes. When the invitation from the Preston Foundation arrived, it felt almost unreal. Only 100 students nationwide earned the right to compete in the National Math Challenge Finals. Scholarship winners who would receive airfare, hotel, and an all-access pass to a 3-day competition at the Atlanta Conference Center. That number, 100, floated in Aaliyah's mind like a neon sign. Out of thousands of hopeful applicants, she had made the cut. It wasn't just about her talent. It was a vote of confidence from complete strangers who believed she belonged on a stage she'd only dreamed of. Aaliyah thumbed through her folder, finding the official letter again, an elegant script beneath the Preston seal. Congratulations on your remarkable achievement. We look forward to welcoming you among the nation's brightest mathematical minds. She traced the words with her fingertip. In the moment she opened that envelope back home, Kiana had wept with pride. And Eloise had declared that the family's sacrifices had at last paid off. What sacrifice? Aaliyah half joked when her grandmother fussed over the letter in the kitchen. I just did my homework. But Eloise's eyes had shone with understanding. Sweetheart, this isn't just about math. It's about showing the world what a girl from South Chicago can achieve. In the soft afternoon light streaming through the cabin window, Aaliyah felt the weight of those sacrifices settle around her. She wondered how many nights Kiana worked past midnight to cover their rent and keep the scholarship dreams alive. She thought of Eloise's gentle scolds for staying up too late, calculating integrals by the glow of a cheap lamp. She remembered the packet of index cards Eloise had given her, each one carrying a single affirmation like, "You are brilliant," "You are worthy," or "You belong anywhere you sit." Those cards had lined Aaliyah's desk at home, and now one peeked out of her backpack, folded neatly against the scholarship certificate. Aaliyah flipped the index card open. Your mind can take you anywhere. She pressed it to her heart. Even as the hum of engines swelled beneath her, the words felt like an anchor. Her seatmate, a middle-aged man in a pressed suit, glanced over. He offered a polite nod. First Nationals? He asked quietly, noticing her folder. Yeah, Aaliyah replied, voice soft but steady. The National Math Challenge. His brow lifted. That's quite an honor. Good luck. She managed a small smile. Every nod of encouragement, whether from strangers, family, or Miguel Ramirez down the aisle, was a reminder she wasn't alone in this. As the flight attendant delivered snacks to each passenger, Aaliyah's mind traced back through the milestone moments that led here. She'd spent countless Saturday mornings at the library, poring over geometry proofs. She'd entered local math fairs because her teacher, Mrs. Johnson, saw something special in her. And every time she doubted herself, like when a problem couldn't be cracked on the first try, Eloise would appear in the doorway, tea in hand, and say, "Don't tell me you're ready to quit." That voice still rang clear. Have you ever had someone remind you how capable you are when you doubted yourself? She thought, picturing the viewers at home. Comment 1 if you've ever needed a reminder. Aaliyah would love to know you've been there too. Below them, the patchwork of suburbs and highways gave way to sprawling green fields. Each patch of earth passing by the window seemed to whisper of new possibilities. Aaliyah leaned her head against the cushion, closed her eyes, and allowed herself that rare moment of calm. Tomorrow, she'd face stiff competition, peers who solved complex equations as casually as pets chasing tennis balls. But tonight, she simply inhaled the promise of what lay ahead. Then she opened her workbook to a marked page. Chapter 7, Quadratic Functions and Their Applications. Those problems were notoriously tricky, but Aaliyah had spent an entire week mastering them. She tapped the pencil against the page, rereading the example. In that quiet cabin, surrounded by strangers, she practiced the steps in her head, each one a small victory. Her thoughts drifted to Veronica Harlow's harsh words, still a sour note amid the ambition. "You don't belong here." The sting of that insult sharpened her resolve. She knew the difference between someone imposing limits on her and the truth she carried in her mind, that intelligence, like a bird, could not be caged by bias or bigotry. As she worked through the sample problems, Aaliyah felt that bird of possibility spread its wings. The intercom crackled then, a calm voice announcing their descent toward Atlanta. Aaliyah sat up, her pencil tapping to a stop. Ahead lay a new city, new challenges, and soon enough, a crowded auditorium filled with bright minds and hushed anticipation. But for now, she let the soft rattle of the landing gear soothe her. As the plane touched down, Aaliyah folded her math workbook and slipped it into her backpack. She took one last look out the window, the sprawling landscape of Georgia unfolding beneath her, grid lines of streets and patches of forest like another kind of equation waiting to be solved. She straightened her backpack straps, squared her shoulders, and prepared to step into the next chapter of her journey, whispered to herself, "I do belong here." And with that, she rose from her seat, ready to turn the page. Even before she reached her seat on Flight 482, Aaliyah Wright felt the first prickles of anxiety at O'Hare's security checkpoint. The cavernous terminal buzzed with travelers hauling roller bags and sipping steaming coffee from chain kiosks. Aaliyah gripped the strap of her backpack. Inside, neatly organized folders and her trusty math workbook, while her mother, Kiana, stood close beside her. Behind them, a steady procession of first-class passengers moved through with minimal fuss. Aaliyah watched, heart fluttering, as a boy in a crisp polo and his parents strolled past, their boarding passes barely glanced at by the TSA officer. When it was Aaliyah's turn, the officer's expression changed. He looked down at her boarding pass and scholarship certificate, then aside at the sea of people. "Random additional screening," he mumbled without looking her in the eye. Aaliyah's chest tightened. She'd read about random screenings on travel blogs. Nothing personal, just protocol. But the cold formality of his tone felt anything but routine. "Please step to the side, young lady," he said, as he directed her toward the plastic bins. Aaliyah moved obediently, sliding her backpack off and setting it on the conveyor belt. As she slipped out of her jacket, she recognized the faintest flicker of hesitation in the officer's eyes, then watched him turn away without apology. The palms of her hands had gone damp with sweat. She forced a polite "thank you" as he ran a scanner over her suitcase, her jacket, her shoes, twice. The overhead announcement for the next boarding group came and went. Aaliyah remained standing under the stark fluorescent light, methodically emptying every pocket, as if hoping that if she complied perfectly, the tension would abate. Instead, it grew. Each secondary pat-down felt like a judgment. "She doesn't belong here," whispered through every precise brush of the metal detector wand. Aaliyah swallowed hard, remembering her grandmother's steady advice. "Own your space, baby girl. They can't shrink you unless you shrink first." She squared her jaw and nodded politely when the officer finally waved her through, his eyes already sliding past her to the next passenger. By the time she reassembled her things, jacket, laptop, water bottle, workbook, her breathing was shallow and her cheeks warm. Kiana placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Almost there," she said, voice low. Eloise's affirmation card. "You are worthy," peeked from the front pocket of Aaliyah's folder, and she pressed it for courage. They hurried through the concourse toward Gate B22, where a long line had formed. The digital display flashed, "Boarding Group 1, First Class," and Aaliyah swallowed the lump in her throat. The airport crowd parted as they approached, and she felt the curious gazes of business travelers and families. A little girl clutched her father's hand across the aisle, eyes wide. A man in a tailored suit offered a sympathetic smile. For a fleeting moment, it felt possible that the world would simply let her walk on. But boarding lanes have their own unseen rules. When the attendant scanned her pass, the line behind her stuttered. Aaliyah watched as Veronica Harlow, perched at the boarding podium, glanced down with narrowed eyes. She jabbed at her tablet screen a moment longer than necessary, lips pursed. Boarding passes and IDs can be checked twice, 3 times, any excuse to make someone wait. Aaliyah managed a polite nod as Veronica finally typed a confirmation and lifted her head. The attendant's expression was courteous outwardly, but Aaliyah caught a flicker of satisfaction in Veronica's eyes, as though the delay had renewed some private sense of order. Aaliyah forced a calm smile and floated through the jet bridge. Behind her, the attendant barked at an older couple about luggage size. No one else seemed to earn that scrutiny. Inside the cabin, crisp leather seats gleamed under soft overhead lighting. Aaliyah paused in the aisle, searching for seat 3A, when Veronica reappeared, standing tall beside the overhead bins. "Seat 3A?" Veronica asked, voice flat. She leaned in to examine Aaliyah's pass again, then looked at the Stanford sweatshirt emblem embroidered on the front of Aaliyah's maroon hoodie. "First time in first class," she added, as though sharing a joke. Aaliyah's throat tightened. She'd practiced this. "No, ma'am. My family flew first class when I was too little to remember." But the word stuck. Instead, she managed, "It's my first time, yes." Veronica's lips twitched into a closed-lipped smirk. "Well, do your best not to touch the screens or lean on the seats. First-class standards apply to everyone." Her tone was louder, just enough for the neighboring passenger to hear. A hush followed. Aaliyah pressed her hands to her sides and edged past, senses on high alert. As she slid into 3A, the seatbelt clicks ringing in her ears, she noticed the cabin's subtle symphony. Quiet whispers, sympathetic glances, a flight attendant hurrying past with a service trolley. Miguel Ramirez shot Aaliyah a quick, understanding nod before turning away to help another passenger. That nod was a lifeline, proof that not everyone here believed she didn't belong. Aaliyah scooted to the window, tucking her backpack at her feet. The initial thrill of the view, the endless runway linings, the distant horizon, felt muted by the tension that coiled in her stomach. She closed her eyes for a millisecond and drew in a quiet breath, focusing on the gentle hum of the engines and the faint click of the window shade latch. She reminded herself of a fact she had proved time and again. Intelligence and determination didn't reside in a ticket or a seat. They lived in your mind. Below, the world outside seemed to pulse with life. Taxiways bustling with luggage vehicles, ground crews guiding other planes into position. Aaliyah let her eyes track the dancers of light and shadow on the tarmac. She wondered if the other young finalists, somewhere else on the plane, were feeling the same mix of excitement and nerves. Have you ever been singled out at an airport? Comment 1 if you have, 2 if not. Aaliyah would like to know she's not alone. In the soft glow of the cabin lamp, she opened her workbook and flipped to the page marked Chapter 7, Quadratic Functions. She'd studied those equations for days, her pencil notes weaving around the margins like loyal shadows. As she ran her fingertip over the inked lines, a sense of calm settled. The numbers on the page carried no judgment, no suspicion, only the promise of patterns waiting to be solved. But patterns could change in an instant. As the flight attendants stowed their luggage and the engines roared to life, Aaliyah's fingers stilled on the page. She felt the plane shift on the taxiway, heard the captain's voice through the intercom preparing them for takeoff, and deep inside, a spark of resolve ignited. This next chapter would demand more than equations. It would demand courage. The hum of anticipation rippled through the cabin. Through the window, runway lights blurred into streaks as they accelerated. Aaliyah pressed her forehead gently against the cool glass, heart pounding in sync with the engines. She was 9 years old, alone in a sea of critics, but every humiliation, the extra screening, the boarding pass checks, Veronica's thinly veiled contempt, had only made her resolve stronger. As they lifted into the sky, Aaliyah closed her eyes once more and whispered a promise to herself. I belong anywhere my mind can go. And with that conviction, she braced for the challenges and injustices ahead, ready to stand firm and fight back in the only way she knew how. The cabin lights hummed softly as Flight 482 leveled off at 35,000 feet. Aaliyah Wright sat perfectly still in Seat 3A, her knees tucked firmly against the plush leather of the first-class cabin. Around her, life aboard the plane had resumed its polite, composed rhythm. Passengers flipped through magazines. Flight attendants glided along the aisles with trays of sparkling water and scented hot towels. Yet between those civilized motions, a different current rippled, one of quiet judgment, sympathy, and whispered speculation. Aaliyah felt it in the cool stares of nearby travelers. A woman in an elegant scarf glanced at her, lips pressed in concern. A businessman 2 rows ahead nodded ever so slightly in quiet support. Others averted their eyes, as if glimpsing an uncomfortable secret best ignored. That wave of emotion, unease tinged with empathy, brushed across Aaliyah's skin like a soft breeze. She gripped her math workbook in her lap, the familiar feel of its scuffed cover grounding her. Above the gentle background noise, the narrator's voice cut through in a calm, inviting tone. Have you ever witnessed a child humiliated in public? Tap 1 if you have, or 2 if not. Let Aaliyah know you're right here with her. It was a small moment of connection, but powerful. Aaliyah glanced at the camera mounted near the ceiling, then focused on her hands, imagining the tiny counters filling with clicks from viewers around the world. Somewhere, people were choosing their response, silently declaring their solidarity, or admitting they'd never seen such clear prejudice directed at a child. 1 or 2, what would you pick? Comment below. That brief, interactive pause felt like a lifeline. Aaliyah closed her eyes and let out a slow breath. The initial sting of Veronica Harlow's scorn had faded into a soft ache, one that pounded in her ears every time she thought of that sharp sentence. You don't belong here. Now, surrounded by curious eyes, she felt a flicker of pride amid the shame. She belonged here, just as much as anyone wearing a suit or sipping a mimosa. The flight attendant service continued, but Veronica's presence loomed. Aaliyah watched through the corner of her eye as Veronica strode down the aisle, her posture rigid, voice crisp. Would you like a sparkling water, Miss Wright? Her tone was polite, but the emphasis on Miss Wright bore an undercurrent of challenge. Aaliyah lifted her head, meeting Veronica's gaze directly. She remembered Miguel Ramirez's earlier nod, the silent promise that some aboard still believed in fairness. Gathering her courage, Aaliyah replied, Yes, please. Thank you. Veronica placed the glass on the tray table with exaggerated precision and turned on her heel. As she disappeared toward the galley, the soft clink of glass seemed to echo louder than the hum of the engines. Aaliyah cradled the glass, letting the ice cubes rattle softly. She imagined the tiny logos and patterns on the condensation, the proof that this was real, not a dream or a mistake. She took a small sip, the cold liquid soothing the burn in her throat. Then she set the glass down and opened her workbook again, flipping to the tab marked Circle Theorems. Even here, the geometry diagrams felt like puzzles she could solve, formulas she could master. But the vibration of someone's phone in her pocket reminded her that another kind of problem was unfolding. Through the aisle, she saw the man in the pinstriped suit leaning forward, whispering to his wife and nodding toward Aaliyah. She caught a snippet. She's so calm, at 9 years old. She also saw a young mother 2 rows back glancing at her toddler, mouthing words that looked like, See that? Aaliyah tried not to shrink under their stares. Instead, she let each sympathetic glance bolster her resolve. She was not invisible, and she was not alone. The narrator's voice returned, softer this time. If you could do one thing to comfort Aaliyah right now, what would it be? Tap 1 to send her a virtual hug, or 2 to stand up and speak out. It was not a choice between fantasy or action. It was an invitation for every viewer to decide how they would respond to injustice. Aaliyah imagined a sea of ones and twos flickering across screens worldwide, a silent community rallying behind her. She pressed her palm against her chest, where her grandmother's affirmation tag peeked out. "You are worthy." That little card had saved her during late-night study sessions and stood by her side now. She squeezed it gently, anchoring herself in the faith of her family. The seatbelt sign blinked on, and the pilot's voice crackled through the overhead speaker. "Folks, we've reached cruising altitude. Feel free to move about the cabin once the seatbelt signs are off." In the flurry of returning to normalcy, stretching legs, visiting lavatories, Aaliyah lingered in her seat. She watched Veronica assist another passenger, offering a warm smile that Aaliyah knew was reserved for the regular first-class travelers. The contrast set her heart racing again. In that split second, Aaliyah weighed her options: speak up, retreat into silence, or gather evidence to show the world this was happening. She remembered the recorder pressed against her palm, hidden beneath the crisp folds of her worksheet. The knowledge that she could document every slur, every cold glance, gave her a quiet power. She looked at her reflection in the window, dark eyes bright with determination, small lips pressed into a firm line. She was no longer just a spectator. She was an actor in her own story. What should Aaliyah do next? Comment 1 if she should stay calm and record, or 2 if she should ask for help from Miguel Ramirez. Aaliyah lifted her head from the workbook, her breathing steady. The moment felt alive, suspended between fear and courage, between silence and action. She reached into her backpack for her math index cards and extracted the one that read, "Own your space." She placed it on her tray table and let her hand rest on it. As the murmured conversation circled her, questions about what had happened, whispers of disbelief, Aaliyah made her decision. She closed her workbook, gathered her recorder, and gave a small, resolute nod to the empty seat beside her. The cabin was more than just a place of travel. It was a stage. And Aaliyah Wright, 9 years old and brimming with quiet conviction, was ready to write the next act. The wheels of consequence had begun to turn, and the world was watching. By mid-flight, the novelty of cruising altitude had worn off for most passengers. But for Aaliyah Wright, it was the moment she dreaded: the beverage service. The cabin lights cast a soft glow over the polished trays and crystal-clear glassware, and Miguel Ramirez moved with practiced ease from row to row, offering water and juice. Meanwhile, Veronica Harlow hovered in the middle of first class, her eyes scanning the cabin like a hawk. Aaliyah watched Miguel approach seat 2B, place a glass of sparkling water precisely on the tray table, and step back with a polite nod. Then he turned and headed for seat 3C, skipping her entirely. Aaliyah's chest tightened with every careful pour he made for others. She opened her mouth to say, "Excuse me," but the words caught in her throat. Veronica seized that moment. She advanced on Aaliyah's seat, holding a pitcher of water with one gloved hand. The crisp white of her uniform sleeve contrasted sharply with the deep crimson of Aaliyah's scholarship sweatshirt. Without warning, Veronica tilted the pitcher as if topping off the glass, and the water instead cascaded across Aaliyah's lap. Aaliyah gasped as icy droplets soaked through her sweatshirt and splashed onto her workbook, the pages curling at the edges. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a fraction of a second, the only sound was the gentle trill of water hitting leather upholstery. Then Veronica's voice rang out, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Look what happens when someone doesn't know how things work in first class." Aaliyah froze, shock raining down harder than the water ever could. A few passengers stirred in their seats, casting sympathetic glances. Others simply stared in awkward silence. Her cheeks burned with humiliation as she scrambled to rescue her workbook, fingers fumbling over damp pages. The crisp scholarship letter, proof of her achievement, was smeared with droplets, the ink blotting in places. "Sorry," Aaliyah's voice trembled as she tried to lean away, but Veronica leaned in closer, eyes glinting. "Some people just don't appreciate the privilege they're given," she continued, as though delivering a polished lecture. "This isn't a playground." A tiny whimper escaped Aaliyah's lips. She pulled the soaked workbook to her chest, hugging it like a shield. The verbal jab cut deeper than the cold water could ever reach. She pressed her lips together, holding back tears. Her hands shook so badly she could barely grip the pages. Across the aisle, Miguel paused, his face tight with apology. He glanced at Veronica, then at Aaliyah, wanting to intervene, but restrained by protocol. Aaliyah caught his eye and saw genuine concern, and a flicker of frustration at the injustice. Veronica swept her hand in a brusque gesture. "Just making sure you know your place." She spun on her heel and marched back toward the galley, leaving Aaliyah trembling in the damp aftermath. Aaliyah's heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a thunderous reminder of her vulnerability. She closed her eyes, picturing her grandmother's steady gaze and her mother's calm reassurance. She remembered the affirmation, "Silence is complicity." Gingerly, she patted her lap, blotting at the wet fabric. The cold had become a numb ache, but the real sting was in the humiliating message. She looked around, noticing too many eyes avoiding hers, like they were complicit too. In that moment, she realized this was more than an insult. It was a display of power meant to scare her into silence. Her fingers brushed the recorder tucked under her worksheet. It had already captured Veronica's harsh words, all the proof she needed. Aaliyah inhaled slowly, letting the decision form in her mind. She would not let this moment pass unchallenged. Just then, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, not the confident announcement from before, but a clipped update. "Ladies and gentlemen, flight attendants, please prepare for service completion. We'll be in Atlanta shortly." The routine cadence of that message felt like an invitation. Ordinary events masking extraordinary truth. Aaliyah exhaled, focus sharpening in her hazel eyes. She patted the recorder's power button discreetly, ensuring it was still running. A lull fell over the cabin as passengers adjusted to the news of imminent descent. Aaliyah gathered her soaked papers, sliding them into a clear plastic bag she'd stashed in her backpack for extra worksheets. She tugged her damp sweatshirt over her head, revealing the bright pattern of her long-sleeved shirt underneath. Each movement was deliberate, every breath steadying her resolve. Miguel returned with a fresh glass of water. No fanfare, just a quiet act of kindness. He placed it gently on her tray table. Their eyes met, and he nodded. "I'm sorry this happened." Aaliyah forced a small, grateful smile. Allies could be found in unexpected places. She sipped the new water, cool and unjudging. The plane might have altitude, but the boiling tension in her chest had cooled to a resolute calm. Veronica Harlow's presence still loomed like a shadow at the back of the cabin. But Aaliyah now held more than fear. She had evidence, family behind her, and the solidarity of Miguel's silent support. And in that moment, the small recorder in her hand felt like a beacon of justice. As the engines hummed steadily and runway lights twinkled through the oval window, Aaliyah folded her arms across her chest. She would ride out this turbulence, and when the time was right, she would show the world exactly how high a 9-year-old's voice could rise above contempt. Aaliyah sat in her seat as the cabin lights dimmed for the in-flight movie, but her mind remained wide awake. The chill of Veronica Harlow's water splatter still clung to her sweatshirt, and the hum of the engines felt charged with tension. Around her, passengers settled into a muted lull, some engrossed in the film's opening credits, others dozing lightly under the soft glow of reading lamps. To everyone else, it was a routine evening flight. To Aaliyah, it was a battleground. She leaned back against the leather seat and reached into her backpack for something small and vital. Her voice recorder. It was a simple device, no larger than a deck of cards, one her mother had suggested. Kiana's exact words had been firm but gentle. "If you ever feel unsafe or unheard, capture the truth. It's your voice, and it should be heard." Aaliyah's fingers closed around the recorder. She recalled her grandmother Eloise's steady gaze as she tucked the device into Aaliyah's backpack before they'd left Chicago. "Don't let anyone silence you." In that moment, those words felt like a shield and a spark both. She pressed the power button, the tiny red light blinking to life, and slipped the recorder into the seat back pocket in front of her, aimed discreetly toward the aisle. Her heart thudded. This was no trivial act of defiance. She was 9 years old, still leaps away from adulthood, and yet here she was, ready to document injustice in real time. The soft whistle of the air vent did little to calm her nerves. She closed her eyes and breathed in slowly, centering herself with the promise she'd whispered earlier. "I belong anywhere my mind can go." In the dim cabin, Veronica Harlow moved down the aisle carrying a dessert tray. Her heels clicked like a metronome, each step echoing Aaliyah's quickening pulse. The flight attendant paused at seat 3C, served another guest, then turned toward Aaliyah with practiced polish. Aaliyah felt the faint hum of the recorder picking up every muted whisper. "Here you go, Miss Wright," Veronica said, sliding a petit four onto Aaliyah's tray table. Aaliyah's fingers hovered over the dessert, but she didn't reach for it. Instead, she raised her eyes to meet Veronica's. The attendant's expression was polite, too polite. Behind it lay that same undercurrent Aaliyah had come to recognize, the sense that she was an intruder in this cabin. "Thank you," Aaliyah said softly, her voice steady. Veronica nodded curtly and moved on. As the heels receded, the hiss of chairs returning to upright positions whispered through the rows. Passengers shifted, some cracking open movies, others adjusting overhead lights. Aaliyah closed her eyes again, drawing strength from the recorded hum at her side. She pictured her workbook at home, its pages sun-worn but resilient. She pictured her grandmother leaning in, her voice clear and unwavering. Then, she let the fear slip away. Moments later, a ripple of disturbance coursed through the cabin. A metallic clink sounded as someone in first class dropped their drink, and heads turned. Aaliyah sat perfectly still, concealing the slight tremor in her fingers. Across the aisle, the student in 2B, a quiet boy she'd seen earlier, glanced at her with a sympathetic lift of his eyebrows before returning to his seat. That sympathetic glance, brief though it was, mattered. It reminded Aaliyah that her fight wasn't isolated. There were unseen allies in the cabin, watching. And now she had proof, captured on her little recorder. Her chest swelled with a sense of purpose. No longer just a child bullied by an authority figure, she was becoming an agent of her own story. The narrative of "you don't belong here" was breaking down, word by word, click by click, on the device tucked beneath her worksheet. The movie's opening theme faded into dialogue, and Aaliyah leaned over to her workbook, flipping to the marked page on circle theorems. She scribbled a quick note in the margin. "Record every word. Truth matters." The record light glowed bright in her periphery, a tiny beacon of empowerment. In the galley behind Veronica, Miguel Ramirez paused mid-step, casting a glance toward 3A. His face was a mix of regret and admiration. Aaliyah felt his gaze, locked into her own resolve. She gave him a barely perceptible nod. It was a mutual understanding. She would speak up, and he would silently bear witness. The cabin lights brightened for a moment as the flight attendant service concluded. Then, as if synchronizing with Aaliyah's heartbeat, the seatbelt sign flicked off. Aaliyah exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She leaned back, arms folded across her chest, recorder still rolling. Tomorrow, she'd see the ground below Atlanta and walk into a hall filled with other young mathematicians. But right now, 35,000 feet in the sky, she was making history of her own. She had turned fear into resolve, humiliation into evidence, and silence into a whispered promise. With that resolve settled inside her like a quiet fire, Aaliyah closed her eyes and let the gentle hum of Flight 482 lull her, not into complacency, but into a calm readiness for what was to come. She belonged here, in first class, and in her own narrative, and nothing, not even a 9-year-old's voice, could be silenced. Aaliyah's hands trembled as she retrieved her phone from the seat back pocket. The little red light on her recorder had captured every harsh word, every splash of water, proof of Veronica's cruelty. Now, it was time for the decisive moment. She opened her contacts, thumb hovering over Dad, Senator Robert Wright, and steeled herself. She tapped his name. As the rings echoed through her earbuds, the cabin's low murmur faded into nothing. Aaliyah pressed the phone against her ear and whispered, "Dad?" Her father's deep voice crackled with surprise. "Aaliyah, everything okay up there?" Swallowing hard, she narrated Veronica's abuse, how she'd been humiliated at security, how the continued inspections felt like judgment, how Veronica had poured water on her lap and mocked her right in front of everyone. She spoke quickly, her words tumbling out in a rush of fear and relief. "Dad, I recorded it," she said. "Can you help me? Please?" There was a moment of silence. Then her father's tone shifted, steel replacing concern. "Hold on, sweetheart. Stay right there." Aaliyah felt the plane jostle in a gentle turbulence. She gripped her recorder and purse straps, heart pounding. Through the thin connection, she heard her father's voice again, this time clipped and authoritative. "This is Senator Wright. I need a direct line to FAA headquarters, immediately." She pressed the mute button, mouth agape. Even 9 years old, she recognized the power in that tone, an invisible tide turning the moment he spoke. Aaliyah slid her phone beneath her workbook, listening as her father's side of the call resonated in her ear. "Full ground stop on all trans-American flights nationwide. Federal civil rights investigation authorized." Her pulse thundered. Aaliyah snapped the phone closed and tucked it away, eyes widening as she peered down the aisle. Passengers chatted quietly among themselves, unaware that at any moment their world could shift. Moments later, the captain's voice cut through the cabin in a measured but urgent announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have just received orders from the FAA to initiate a ground stop on all trans-American flights, effective immediately. We apologize for the disruption and will advise you as soon as we have further instructions." The words landed like a thunderclap. Aaliyah heard a collective intake of breath ripple through the first-class cabin. A silver-haired businessman gripped his armrests, eyes darting toward the flight attendants. A mother leaned protectively toward her child. The whisper of uncertainty spread faster than any storm. Veronica Harlow, returning from the galley, froze in mid-step. Her poised professionalism cracked for an instant, astonishment flickering across her face, before she masked it with a curt nod. Miguel Ramirez appeared at her side, eyes wide. He gave Aaliyah a brief, triumphant glance, as if to say, "You did it." Aaliyah's chest swelled with astonished pride. The same power that had been used against her, protocols, authority, rules, was now wielded in her favor. She replayed her father's clipped command in her mind, marveling that her single call had sparked a nationwide halt. The statistic was staggering. Hundreds of aircraft, thousands of passengers grounded midair and on the tarmac until the investigation could begin. From her vantage point in 3A, Aaliyah watched as flight attendants mobilized, communicating urgently with the cockpit. Overhead bins clicked shut with renewed haste. In the aisle behind her, people stood and murmured, their voices a hum of curiosity and relief. No one knew the specifics, just that something extraordinary had happened, and it had come from a little girl's plea for justice. Tears pricked Aaliyah's eyes, but they were not tears of fear. They were tears of vindication. She pressed her palm to the small recorder tucked under her workbook, imagining the evidence it held. Veronica's harsh words, the splash of water, even the hush that had followed each insult, all preserved and ready to expose the truth. Aaliyah felt a light tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Miguel offering her a fresh bottled water, the ice clinking softly. He pointed toward the curtain that separated first class from the rest of the cabin and mouthed, "They're bringing in the head of flight ops." She gave him a grateful nod, her voice caught in a mix of relief and exhilaration. In that moment, Aaliyah knew her life was irrevocably changed. A 9-year-old from South Chicago had stood up to discrimination and, with a single call, reshaped the power balance of a major airline. As the cabin settled into organized chaos, flight attendants reconciling passenger seats, crew members coordinating next steps, Aaliyah leaned against the window and whispered to herself, "I meant what I said. I belong anywhere my mind can go." The flight path was still pointed toward Atlanta, but Aaliyah's journey had shifted. She had become more than a contestant in a math competition. She had become a symbol of quiet strength and systemic change. And as Flight 482 glided above the clouds, paused in mid-flight by her call, Aaliyah Wright sat ready to face whatever came next, with courage, conviction, and the unwavering belief that her voice, no matter how small, could echo across the skies. The cabin lights flickered with a soft urgency as the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have received an emergency directive from the FAA, an immediate ground stop on all trans-American flights nationwide. Please remain calm. Flight attendants will escort you through the necessary procedures." A hush rippled through first class. Forks froze midway to lips. Binocular-eyed business travelers paused Netflix episodes, and toddlers tucked into blanket forts peeked up with wide eyes. Aaliyah Wright felt her heart pound, not with fear, but with a steady thrill. The same authority that had once silenced her peers with flight rules was now on her side, enforcing a halt to an entire fleet. Veronica Harlow, stationed at the front of the cabin, straightened abruptly, eyes darting to the cockpit curtain. Miguel Ramirez placed a reassuring hand on Aaliyah's shoulder. His calm nod spoke volumes. "You did this." Aaliyah offered him a small, grateful smile, the apology in her gaze saying more than words ever could. Passengers murmured, seeking explanations. A silver-haired man in row 2 leaned over to his neighbor. "Ground stop? All trans-American aircraft?" His voice trembled with disbelief. A woman in 4A gripped the armrest, as if bracing for turbulence. Somewhere behind them, a flight attendant began distributing update cards, printed bulletins explaining the FAA's civil rights inquiry. Aaliyah watched as the cabin crew sprang into action. Headsets went on, clipboards appeared, and the efficient choreography of airline procedure replaced the earlier tension. The hush didn't fade. It transformed into a curious anticipation. Strangers exchanged worried glances that softened into respectful smiles when they looked at Aaliyah. Their eyes said, "We see you." Through the window, runway lights blinked alive beneath the wing. Taxiing vehicles halted in their tracks. Passengers in economy peered through the curtain, scanning for clues. Aaliyah felt no shame in being the center of attention. Instead, pride blossomed in her chest, bright and warm. She secreted her recorder back into her backpack, confident it held the proof of what had transpired. Her thoughts drifted to her family, her grandmother's gentle admonition, "Silence is complicity," and her mother's unwavering faith that justice would find its way. She pictured her father's firm voice commanding federal power with a single call. In that mental snapshot, the Wright family's quiet strength coalesced into a beacon that cut through the cabin's low rumble. Then, as if the moment demanded ceremony, a senior flight attendant emerged from the galley, clipboard in hand. She cleared her throat and spoke with a measured calm. "On behalf of Trans-American Airlines and the FAA, we apologize for this unprecedented interruption. We understand the inconvenience and appreciate your patience. Our goal is to ensure passenger safety and uphold your rights. The captain will update you shortly." Her words landed gently but firmly. Around Aaliyah, tension gave way to respectful nods. Some passengers offered soft applause, a ripple of approval echoing through the rows. Aaliyah dared a glance toward Veronica, whose face had drained of color. The attendant's proud posture faltered, replaced by the realization that her authority had been undermined by a courageous 9-year-old. Aaliyah closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, Above the engine's steady hum, she felt a profound shift in the world around her. The balance of power had tilted, even if only for a moment. She straightened in her seat, the frayed edges of her sweatshirt suddenly feeling more like a uniform than a thrift store find. This was her victory, proof that even the smallest voice, when backed by truth and conviction, could command the skies. As the cabin buzzed with the low murmur of people processing what had happened, Aaliyah tapped her tray table gently. The runway beyond the window lay still, a runway that would remain quiet until justice's verdict was delivered. And for the first time that day, high above the ground, 9-year-old Aaliyah Wright felt utterly and unequivocally at home. The ground stop order rippled through Transamerican's corporate headquarters like an electric shock. By the time Flight 482 taxied to Gate A14, the airline's emergency response team was already mobilizing behind locked doors. Back in the cabin, Aaliyah Wright sat quietly as flight attendants escorted Veronica Harlow and her colleagues to the cockpit for a debriefing. Chairs scraped, murmurs rose, and the low hum of phone calls crackled through overhead headsets. "Veronica," Miguel whispered as he passed Aaliyah, "I'm sorry you had to go through this." His sympathetic glance carried more regret than words could convey. Aaliyah nodded, bracing herself against the textbook she'd stashed in her lap. She felt a twinge of guilt for Miguel's predicament. He risked his career by standing with her, but she also recognized the weight of what he'd done. Passengers filed out of first class under the calm guidance of crew members. Luggage trolleys rolled past and the scent of jet fuel drifted in from the tarmac. The emergency flyers handed to every seat described a federal civil rights inquiry into alleged discrimination aboard Flight 482. It was the kind of language Aaliyah had only ever heard in documentaries. "We take your rights seriously. We will investigate." Below the cabin, in the hidden heart of the plane, Veronica and her fellow attendants answered rapid-fire questions from the captain and a Transamerican manager. Voices rose and fell, clipped and urgent. Aaliyah couldn't hear specifics, but she caught words like formal complaint, recording evidence, and protecting our brand. The employees emerged pale-faced, uniforms immaculate, but spirits drained. They passed Aaliyah's row in silence, an unspoken acknowledgement that the power hierarchy had been upended. Aaliyah slid her backpack off the floor and opened her workbook, fingers tracing the margin where she'd penciled "record every word." Her recorder sat next to her pages, its tiny light a steady reminder that she held the truth. She drew a slow breath, reflecting on the immediate consequences: a cockpit interrogation, a federal inquiry, and media alerts clipping across airline news tickers. The flight that began as a dream trip had turned into a national incident. In the aisle, the flight manager approached Aaliyah with measured courtesy. "Miss Wright," she said, voice soft yet formal, "thank you for your patience. We will arrange for your family to deplane first. Our team will escort you to a private lounge." The words sounded generous, but Aaliyah sensed the undercurrent of damage control. She nodded, managing a polite smile. Miguel lingered to hand off her bag. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Aaliyah clenched her jaw, hearing her grandmother's mantra echo. "Silence is complicity. Speak your truth." She replied, "I'm managing." Miguel's nod was half reassurance, half apology. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, Kiana Wright paced the arrivals hall, phone pressed to her ear as she wrestled with Transamerican's customer service line. Every time a representative answered, her voice cracked. "I need to know what's happening. My daughter is on that flight." At home, Eloise sat clutching a box of tissues, her heart pounding at every news update. They'd watched the FAA's emergency bulletin scroll across TV screens. All Transamerican flights grounded pending civil rights investigation. For a moment, they dared to hope that justice was underway. Back aboard Flight 482, cleanup crews arranged for repairs to the carpeting and upholstery, though the stains on Aaliyah's sweatshirt and on her memory couldn't be erased. Passengers disembarked in small, nervous groups. Aaliyah spotted familiar faces. The elderly businessman who'd scolded Veronica earlier. the mother who'd offered her toddler a reassuring smile, the boy in 2B who'd given her that sympathetic look. Each nod of solidarity felt like a small victory. As Aaliyah stepped onto the jet bridge, her recorder tucked securely in her pocket, she felt a surge of resolve. The immediate fallout, crew debriefings, corporate memos, frowning executives, was only the beginning. The real test would come on the ground, where her family would marshal legal counsel, where Transamerican's PR machine would spin narratives, and where the FAA's investigators would sift through evidence. Yet for that moment, she allowed herself a quiet exhale. Her heart fluttered as Miguel slipped her a small, handwritten note. "You did the right thing." Aaliyah clasped it to her chest, grateful for the tiny act of kindness. Down the jet bridge, the bright lights of Atlanta's Concourse B felt warmer than expected, like the promise of new beginnings. Outside, Kiana and Eloise spotted her, rushing forward with tears and embraces. Aaliyah wrapped them both in a hug, the reassurance of family anchoring her in the swirl of chaos. As reporters' cameras flashed in the distance and security escorts guided them away, Aaliyah realized that this journey, rooted in math equations and family love, had become a broader story about courage, justice, and the power of a single voice. Tomorrow, she'd face interviews and formal statements. But for now, shielded by her mother's arms and her grandmother's steady presence, Aaliyah allowed herself the brief luxury of calm, a moment to honor the fallout and prepare for the challenges still to come. By mid-morning, the Great Hall of the FAA's Civil Rights Division had taken on a hush of solemn anticipation. Rows of folding chairs faced a raised dais where 3 stern-faced commissioners presided. At center stage, a banner proclaimed, "Ensuring equitable air travel for all." Aaliyah Wright sat beside her mother and grandmother, clutching her recorder like a talisman. Behind them, a clutch of sympathetic passengers from Flight 482 exchanged nods and knowing glances. Veronica Harlow, dressed in her Transamerican uniform, took the stand under the watchful eyes of reporters and lawyers. At her side stood a representative from the airline. The room crackled with tension as Senator Robert Wright, a tall figure in a dark suit, settled into the witness box. He spoke first, his voice measured. "My daughter is not just any passenger. She is a 9-year-old girl with a scholarship earned through brilliance and hard work. No child should face humiliation at 35,000 feet." Silence fell. Then applause rippled through the audience. Aaliyah felt her heart catch at the swell of approval, validation she and her family had longed for. When Veronica took the stand, her polished demeanor wavered. The lead commissioner opened. "Ms. Harlow, you served Aaliyah Wright cold water and insults, despite clear evidence of her first-class status. How do you explain your conduct?" Veronica swallowed, lips pressed tight. She began with practiced formality. "I was enforcing service standards." But the commissioner held up a photograph of Aaliyah's boarding pass and sweatshirt emblem. The evidence, Aaliyah realized, was undeniable. Next, Miguel Ramirez delivered his testimony. His uniform crisp, his posture unwavering, he recounted, "I saw Ms. Wright treated unfairly. I heard her distress. I served her second only after witnessing the incident. She did nothing to deserve such treatment." Miguel's steady voice and humble honesty brought a ripple of murmured agreement from the audience. Aaliyah's eyes brimmed with gratitude. Here was the ally who had risked everything to speak out. Finally, the FAA's senior investigator presented the recording from Aaliyah's device. Veronica's harsh words, "You don't belong here, and I'll make a note of this," echoed clearly through the speakers. The hush that followed was electric, filled with collective outrage at the blatant discrimination. The lead commissioner rose and addressed the room. "This commission finds that Ms. Harlow's actions constituted a clear violation of federal civil rights regulations. Transamerican Airlines is hereby instructed to issue a formal apology to Aaliyah Wright, implement mandatory bias response training for all cabin crew, and codify a transparent policy allowing lawful passenger recordings during incidents of alleged discrimination." Aaliyah's pulse quickened as the commissioner continued. Furthermore, Veronica Harlow is suspended pending the completion of this training. Trans-American must submit bi-weekly reports to the FAA for 6 months to ensure compliance. A hush of relief and approval swept through the hall. Kiana hugged Aaliyah tight, tears shining in her eyes. Eloise reached for her granddaughter's hand, squeezing it with pride. Even Veronica, her composure shattered, nodded in reluctant acceptance. The final commissioner offered a closing thought. Let today's decision stand as a reminder. Basic human dignity knows no cabin class. Every passenger, child or adult, deserves respect. As the gavel fell, the room broke into warm applause. Flashes from cameras lit the dais. Aaliyah lifted her head, letting the sound wash over her like a gentle wave. In that moment, she felt the weight of every injustice lift, replaced by the quiet power of truth vindicated. Back outside the building, sunlight seemed brighter against the sleek FAA facade. Families, activists, and reporters gathered on the steps. Aaliyah stepped forward with her mother and grandmother, greeted by a crush of sound bites and camera shutters. Aaliyah took a breath, then spoke into the microphones. I hope my story reminds everyone. Cruel words can sting like turbulence, but standing up for yourself can ground injustice for good. I belong here just as much as anyone, at any altitude. Her words landed with heartfelt sincerity, a testament to her resilience. As she descended the steps, the throng parted in respectful silence, many offering smiles and thumbs-up signs. Miguel waited at the bottom, ready with a proud nod and a fresh bottle of water, this time offered without hesitation. Aaliyah glanced back up at the halls where justice had been served. The journey had been long, but the verdict rang clear. Compassion and fairness could prevail, even against the weight of entrenched authority. And as she walked toward a future no longer shadowed by doubt, her heart brimmed with the promise of new horizons, bright, inclusive, and just. Aaliyah Wright stood at the podium in Trans-American Airlines' gleaming headquarters, her small frame surrounded by a diverse circle of executives, industry leaders, and civil rights advocates. Behind her, a banner read, "Right Standards for Equitable Air Travel," the very policies she'd fought to create. She adjusted the microphone, heart steady but racing with pride. The room fell silent. Good morning. My name is Aaliyah Wright. When I was 9 years old, I was shouted at, humiliated, and told I didn't belong in first class simply because of who I am. Today I stand here knowing that no child or adult should ever experience that. She paused, scanning the faces of those who'd cheered her on. Miguel Ramirez, now training director for inclusion. Senator Robert Wright, beaming with pride. And Janet Murray, the new CEO who'd tearfully pledged real reform. Thanks to the FAA's investigation and the courage of people like you, Trans-American is implementing 4 key standards to guarantee dignity in the skies. Transparent complaint tracking. Every discrimination claim will be logged publicly, categorized by demographic data, and reviewed by an independent passenger advocacy office. Mandatory anti-bias training. All customer-facing staff, from pilots to cabin crew, will undergo regular scenario-based training with performance tied to equity metrics. Passenger recording rights. Lawful audio or video recordings of in-flight incidents will be explicitly protected, ensuring accountability. Diversity Advisory Board, a community-based council, including passengers, advocates, and industry experts, will meet quarterly to audit and advise on policy implementation. As she spoke each point, murmurs of approval rippled through the audience. Aaliyah's voice swelled with conviction. These aren't just words on paper. They're commitments we'll live by. And in honor of every traveler whose voice went unheard, Trans-American will endow a Wright Scholarship for future leaders in transportation equity, providing support to students who champion inclusive travel. She took a breath, glancing at her grandmother and mother in the front row. Their smiles gave her strength. When I first boarded Flight 482, I felt alone. Today, I know that individual courage, no matter how small, can spark change across an entire industry. I belong anywhere my mind can go, and so do you. A round of applause broke out, heartfelt and sustained. Flashbulbs popped and cameras rolled as the new CEO, Janet Murray, stepped forward to embrace Aaliyah. "Aaliyah," Murray said, voice thick with emotion, "you've changed this company in ways I never imagined possible. We're committed to upholding these standards, not because we must, but because it's the right thing to do." Aaliyah felt tears sting her eyes, a blend of relief, joy, and the quiet satisfaction of justice served. As the press conference dissolved into interviews and handshakes, she stepped back from the podium, her recorder finally at rest. Your turn. Which of these new standards resonates most with you? Comment number 1 for transparent tracking, number 2 for anti-bias training, number 3 for recording rights, number 4 for diversity advisory board. Your voice matters, just like Aaliyah's did. Share your thoughts below. Hit like if you believe every passenger deserves respect, and subscribe for more stories of everyday courage that reshape our world.